Welcome to part 2 of our lesson on vibrato. In the first part, we talked about what vibrato is and how it develops. But how do you go about controlling the vibrato in your voice once it has developed? And what if you find there's too much of it in your voice and it throws your singing off? That's what we're going to cover in this part. Alright, so once you develop vibrato in your voice, how do you control it and make it work for you as a singer? Now the key to controlling vibrato is controlling your breath. Use your breath to control the amount of vibrato you release when singing. You can do this by breathing less to pull it back and breathing more when you want more vibrato in your pitch. It's also important to know that in some styles of music you might sing, they don't use vibrato. So controlling it is even more important. In classical music, for example, it's not encouraged to use vibrato. Also in choirs, it's usually not good to stick out with the use of vibrato, so a choir teacher will likely ask you to tone it down or eliminate it altogether so you'll sound the same as the rest of the group. So we know controlling the vibrato in your voice is important. Now what if your voice just naturally has too much vibrato in it? What do? Like I said earlier, breathing is the key to controlling vibrato, especially if you have too much of it. Also, remember that a little vibrato in your voice has a big impact on your singing, so use it sparingly. Too much makes your voice sound out of place. Older voices that have lost some of their vocal strength may have a similar sound to vibrato that is actually more like a wobble. A wobble is a really slow vibrato created by a lack of breath coordination. This is caused by a loss of elasticity, or the stretchiness in your vocal cords as you get older. And also a loss of breath support. It's more common in older women than in men. Too fast a vibrato is called tremolo. It's the result of too much tension in the throat and neck region. To give you a better understanding of all this, how about we end part 2 of our lesson with some examples of vibrato and how it's used or not used in different kinds of music. In musical theater, they use both straight tone and vibrato. Vibrato is found less in newer musical plays and more in the earlier days of musical theater performances. They often start with a straight, powerful tone and bring in the vibrato after the start of the song. Straight tone is singing with no variation in pitch, and we'll talk about that later. In opera and classical music, they use their vibrato for sustained tones. That means holding a note for a longer time. The exception is in modern and contemporary music, and some earlier classical music. In those cases, they use straight tone and vibrato. Folk music, which is mostly softer instruments and usually not many of them, use mostly straight tone and only a small amount of vibrato, and way less than, say, an opera singer. A good exercise is to listen to a classical music singer or an opera singer and then compare their voice to a folk singer's. Try to hear the difference in the vibrato of their pitches. The popular music of today that you hear on the radio mostly uses straight tone and only some vibrato in their sustained tones. Vibrato is not considered a real part of these styles, especially not compared to classical, because there is not much of a sustained tone in pop music. There's less chance to use vibrato because of that. They still use vibrato, but just a lot less than those other forms. Okay, that covers the basics of vibrato and how and when it's used in different kinds of music. But in the last part of our lesson, we're going to talk about the 3 things vibrato has a big effect on. And all 3 are your voice. I'll see you in part 3.